Good evening. Welcome to the third in our series of 4 Budget Committee hearings. This is the meeting for Wednesday, April 18th. Call the meeting to order and ask the city recorder to call the roll, please.
Mayor Peterson? Here. Member Bennett?
Here.
Member Tessler? Absent. Member Nanke?
Here.
Member Clausen? Absent. Member Dickey? Here. Member Thomas? Here. Member Blasey? Here. Member Clem?
Here.
Member Berger? Absent. Member Kylowite?
Here.
Member Bailey?
Here.
Member George?
Here.
Member McEvely? Absent. Member Strozit? Here. Member Motley?
Here.
Member Williams?
Here.
Member Pruitt? Absent.
Thank you. And for all of you who want to testify this evening, we have sign-up sheets on both sides of the council chambers, so please take advantage of it. And then I'd like to invite Wesley Snyder from Salem Troop 108, who's working on his Eagle Scout badge, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you, Wesley. Member Nanke, could you give me a motion on the minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move approval of the meeting minutes from April 11th, 2012.
Second.
Any corrections?
Comment, please. Yes, correction?
Corrections, yes.
Thank you.
Member Mott?
Yes, correction, please. At item 8, under appearances, Mr. Paul Jadis, his name is misspelled in here. It's correctly spelled Jaudes.
Thank you.
I know it's difficult when everything is verbal.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any other corrections to the minutes? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Motion passes. Ms. Neville.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Mr. Chair, Mayor, and Budget Committee members. I'm Deborah Neville, the city's budget officer. I'm here to go over a couple of items on the agenda with you this evening. First being item number 4, the correspondence. We continue to receive correspondence as we actually were meeting last week, and we received quite a bit more during the course of the past week. We have a total of 11 emails that are listed on your agenda and the additions agenda that address opposition to cuts in the West Salem Library. I should step back and say in total we received 21 additional items of correspondence. So it's wonderful to hear from the community what they have, what their opinions are and how they feel about the city's budget process. As I said, 11 of those people expressed opposition to cuts to the West Salem Library. And the other group would be 2 people expressed opposition to the airport expansion. Beyond that, we had individual emails addressing opposing cuts not only to the library, but supporting charging loans of public art, creating a charge when public art is loaned from the library. That came from Mr. Lee Coyne. Then we have an email from Janet Noakes, not only opposing the cuts to the West Salem Library, but the fire station in West Salem, as well as the closure of Walker Pool. An email from Jan Schmidt opposes closing Walker Pool. Emails from Joanne Siebert oppose reductions to the code enforcement officer positions. We received an email from Rebecca Engel opposing the downtown enforcement team cut. And we received a letter from the Salem Area Lodging Association signed by members of that association opposing further reductions to the Travel Salem budget. We received a question from Laura Million discussing or asking about URA payments and the possibility of having that agency pay for fire and police services in those areas. and we received a letter from Patrick Hazel talking about budget priorities. So the majority of those were, without going into names, they were expressing interest in opposition of cutting the West Salem Library.
Thank you. Any questions? Member Nanki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On some of these that are actually asking questions versus just expressing opposition to certain elements, and say in regard to the URA, will we actually contact the senders and with a response then?
Yes, we will. And we have in some cases. I'm not sure we've had time to get to everyone yet.
Sure. Just wanted to make sure we had our follow-up.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Handout material.
Moving on to the handout material, you have 2 items this evening. The first item on your agenda, 5A, is information talking about the potential for alternative revenue sources for funding our streetlights and traffic signal electricity usage. This has come before council and subcommittees in various forms, and the Public Works Department prepared additional information on this, or existing information on this, based upon interest expressed at the first Budget Committee meeting we had in this series of meetings. This is presented for your information only at this time.
Ms. Neville,
Yes.
could you direct us to just the bottom line on this one?
I'd like to refer that question to someone from Public Works, please.
Okay.
Mr. Bechtel would be the best person.
Yes, Member Bennett.
Yes. Mr. Bechtel.
What's your
I'm sorry.
question?
I just wondered to kind of get us through this one very quickly. What is the bottom line on this report? What do we see here?
Hi, Mark Bechtel, Parks and Transportation Services Manager. The bottom line is that we spend upwards of, the number right here, we're budgeting about $1.5 million for street light, electricity and maintenance, and then the electricity part for traffic signal and flashers, part of our system. That comes entirely from state gas tax revenues. We're one of the few cities in Oregon where all of that comes from state highway revenues. Usually it's either a mix or it's through different types of lighting districts and other measures. The bottom line is that it takes up a considerable percentage of our state highway revenues each year, which is money that we're not putting into street maintenance or sidewalk construction or repair or other traffic issues. So one of the ideas is that if there was a revenue source that supplanted state highway fund revenues, that is money that could then be directed towards those other transportation activities. So the question would be, if the city council were interested in pursuing an additional revenue stream through some kind of a street light fee or tax, then that would create a revenue stream that would free up that money for highway money, and then you wouldn't necessarily have to give general fund monies to transportation.
Thank you. Any questions on the handout? Mr. Motley.
Yes, thank you. Just quickly, perhaps, I hope that it's related. According to the cameras that are on up there with all the street lights and signals and stuff, who pays for the operation and maintenance of those, including the electricity? I mean, how's that funded?
That's all funded through state highway funds, our allocation of those funds.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Member Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So right now, the streetlights, flashers, et cetera, are out of state highway funds, but you're proposing that this budget committee make a decision about using general fund money? Is that what you're asking? Or are you proposing to the city council that they consider creating some special districts and perhaps a levy and that kind of thing? What do we need to do here?
Yeah, first of all, what I'm doing is responding to an information request from the chair. And so that's what this report is for, is simply for your information. The city council may want to consider this as a potential revenue source for a future budget year.
Any others? Okay, thank you very much.
The last handout item on your agenda this evening is 5B. And for those of you experienced with the Budget Committee, you will be familiar with the summary of Budget Committee actions. This is a log, basically, of the types of things that occur at Budget Committee meetings and as a way of tracking those bits of information. So on attachment 1 to this report, you have additions and changes that have been approved by the Budget Committee, and as you recall, last week we addressed changes to the water sewer franchise fee revenues in the general fund, and that's shown on attachment 1. Attachment 2 consists of items placed on the wish list at this point in time, and we have the one item on the West Salem Library there. Attachment 3 provides a list of reports requested by the Budget Committee through April 11th, and Attachment 4 provides a list that will continue growing of the correspondence that has been received through that last meeting. Mr. Chair?
Great, thank you. Any questions, comments on the remainder of the handouts? All righty, very good. All right, our first budget this evening is a review of the Willamette Valley Communications Center Fund.
Good evening, Chair Bennett, Mayor, and members of the Budget Committee. My name is Jerry Moore. I'm the Chief of Police. My comments will be very brief, for I am going to introduce Director Mark Buckholz, who oversees all three of these funds. And Director Buckholz will walk you through this, and we'll both be here if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Chair Bennett, Mayor, members of the Budget Committee, I am Mark Buckholz. We're going to touch base on the three funds that are managed by the Communication Division of the Police Department. And the first one on your list is Fund 330, which is the Willamette Valley 911 Center. I'll pause a moment between the funds if you have any questions specifically about them, and I'll just take them in order. Then we'll hit the Regional Record System Fund 335 and Radio Communications. So, the Willamette Valley Communications Center Fund is a regional fund that we provide 911 service, police and fire dispatch services for many of the agencies, law enforcement and fire in Marion County, and all of the agencies in Polk County. There's very minimal changes in this year's budget. You'll see bottom line totals, $7.6 million. This year's proposed $7.4 million. And actually, the reason for the small decrease is that the current year budget, we have three large technical projects that were being done part of this year. We'll finish them up into next year, but we won't have any significant projects as part of next year's budget. No change in the FTEs at 60. Those major technical changes that I was talking about are basically core system upgrades to our 911 center. The primary computer-aided dispatch system that we use to manage all calls coming into the center, all field unit activity, is in the process of being upgraded, as is all of our mobile data system, which is all of that communication from the 911 center out to all of our police and fire units, not only Salem units, but all those rest Polk County agencies, Marion County Fire District, all of those folks are involved in that upgrade. So it's not only impacting to us, it's impacting to all of them. And the last major technical upgrade we're doing, actually just completed, is the core 911 phone system. And that upgrade brought us capable, which we currently aren't, to receive text messaging, receive pictures, receive video, that a lot of you would have the opportunity right now on your phone. If you saw something, take a quick picture and be able to give us a very good description of something that might be happening. The network for 911 doesn't receive that yet, so there's a lot of infrastructure upgrade and technology upgrade at every single 911 center. We've now completed the upgrade at our center, and now the state 911 office will be working on the actual network over the next year to 2 years to complete that. In the coming year, like I said, we'll have finished most of the technology upgrades. Our focus now is continuing to try to look for ways to cut costs, improve efficiencies, and that's really expanding the function we already do, which is providing regional communications. There are 2 other 911 centers in Marion County, one up in Woodburn, one out in Staten. They're smaller centers in our operation, but do the same kind of business. And we're beginning discussions with them to look and see how we can come together and be more efficient. And the same is happening out in Lincoln County with a 911 center in Newport called Lincom. We already are providing technology support in the form of sharing our dispatch system with the 911 center in Lincoln City and the one in Toledo, which has basically been a gateway for us to have a relationship with them and hopefully improve economy of scale. Any questions about the 911 operation that the Budget Committee might have?
Member Nanki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Upgrading dispatch and data systems, there's some risk to continuing operations if something were to go wrong during that process. How do we, is it more expensive? How do we actually make sure that we don't lose service while we're performing an upgrade?
Well, that's always an important issue for us, so we focus on a plan to make sure that we have everything operating with our current system, prepared to transition to that new system, and then we actually staff the capabilities, should something go wrong, to revert back without losing any information, without losing a 911 call. And we did that actually. The 911 center, the 911 phone system has actually switched. That happened, and thankfully none of you know it. It happened on the 24th of February. And that is our plan, is have those things happen and nobody knows it because nothing goes wrong and all those plans are in place. And we will do the same thing when we change the mobile data system and the CAD system.
Excellent, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Moving along, I guess in the spirit of regionalization, an opportunity came upon us about 7 or 8 years ago where we provide record system for our own police department, and quite a few other agencies asked if we could provide that support for them. Again, supporting technology is expensive. So this Priors fund, and I call it Priors, that's the name of the software, but it's a records management system for police. We actually share that system with 14 agencies. Helps us all contribute to the cost, the servers, the software maintenance, and everything. The fund actually has no direct employees in it. We use resources from the police department and the IT department. And then in the material and services dollar amount of the 313, we reimburse both IT and police for their support to this fund. And this fund is basically no change, just continuing using the system, no significant upgrades in the coming year. Any questions on the regional records? And the last fund is our radio system fund, providing service to all police, fire, public works, and some of our neighboring jurisdictions, Kaiser Police, the Transit Authority. We are in a process right now of just preparing for a major replacement of that system. We are handful of things in this coming year budget. Our support for, let me see if I got that on the next slide here. The FCC narrowband requirement. So the FCC is telling us on some of our channels we have to narrowband them, and technically it means we have to change some equipment, replace some transmitters, and take a smaller footprint so the FCC can use the rest of that spectrum for somebody else. We'll complete that by the end of this year. We're trying to address interoperability issues to make sure that in our future system, the police, fire, and our neighboring jurisdictions can communicate. So that's all part of this planned upgrade. And that key upgrade will be the replacement of our aging 800 megahertz radio system. That's a core system currently used by fire and public works. And when we replace that, we'll bring police into that, and then we'll all be using the same system. We are in the process and moving forward with, probably in about a month or two, we will release an RFP And traditionally, we would have released an RFP to go out and buy a brand-new radio system, take care of it all ourselves, do it all ourselves. That's been the tradition. But in the need to reduce costs, find more efficient ways to do that, we're also looking at a partnership, and we will look to our neighboring large regional systems to see if they are interested in partnering with us in the replacement of that system. And that will occur over the next 2 years, and that's probably short of a couple issues in the last windstorm. We'll be replacing some microwave that got damaged on one of our towers in the last storm, but other than that, keeping all of our costs to a minimum simply to replace the system. Any questions?
I have one. So much of this is done in partnership with other jurisdictions. How stable are all the partnerships right now? Is everybody on board for the next couple of years anyway?
Well, on our regional record system and our 911 center, they're on board. Everyone, once you get together and you invest in it, you're all part of it, and you're all committed to the same success. The radio system partnership is not something we've done before, but realizing that there is a fair amount of equipment that is extremely expensive in the $2 to $3 million range, where we have to buy something that actually somebody else has. And rather than spend $3 million for something we could possibly share, our goals are to try to utilize the fact neighboring jurisdictions have that equipment. If we can share and partner with them, maybe we can cut our costs in half. Some of our radio towers around the area that provide coverage to us, they also provide coverage to state police, and they provide coverage to ODOT. And so our goal is to try to utilize their microwave systems, maybe put up some of our own and share, just simply cutting costs. Obviously, you have a partnership, it's a give and take, and so sometimes there's bumps in the road, but overall, things are going pretty well.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. I don't have anyone listed to give public testimony on this funds. Is there anyone who'd like to talk? Pick your poison here. You want to talk on this one? But it needs to be germane. Okay, why don't we keep going? Maybe you'll hear one that'll attract you. Okay, our next one is review of emergency services fund. Chief?
Well, good evening, Budget Chair Bennett, Mayor Peterson, and members of the Budget Committee. I'm Fire Chief Mike Niblock, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. My presentation tonight will focus on the Emergency Medical Services Fund and the operations supported by this fund. The Emergency Medical Services Fund has two main focus areas, and that is EMS administration and advanced life support. Both of these sections fall under the direct supervision of the Deputy Chief of Training and EMS, Steve Brown. There are 6 FTEs in this division. I wanted to show you where our revenue and our expenses, where our revenue comes from and where our expenses go. This slide, the pie chart, reflects the revenue streams for the Emergency Medical Services Fund. 49% is remuneration from rural metro ambulance for Salem Fire Department providing first response ALS on our fire engines, and then dispatching charges. Other sources of revenue include third-party ambulance billing services and ambulance billing that's done by the City of Salem for transports that we provide. The chart on the right represents a breakdown of our expenses, and you'll note that our two largest expenses in this fund are personnel services and materials and services. The advanced life support section is responsible for providing materials and services for maintaining our advanced life support system. And that includes our backup ambulance transports, ordering medications and medical supplies that we would use to provide that advanced life support through our engine company responses. The administration section is responsible for ambulance billing. Last year, we provided billing services for 5 individual agencies, including fire districts in Kaiser, Turner, Marion County, Jefferson, and Dallas. As I mentioned earlier, we also provide billing services for transports provided by the Salem Fire Department. In 2011, our billing department handled nearly 9,000 bills, and which totaled a total of $8 million in charges processed, so a fairly busy operation. This section also oversees the Rural Metro Ambulance Contract Administration, and they ensure that our private-public partner is meeting our contractual and county response time standards. Another responsibility of this section is managing nearly 4,500 active Capital Fire Med memberships each year. Major changes in this division over the next year include the full implementation of an electronic medical record system. The operational rollout of this electronic medical records program is expected in the fall of 2012. The move to electronic medical records is federally mandated by 2015, so we'll be well ahead of that required implementation date. This move will also provide the department with better data for quality improvement and quality assurance of our medical calls. Another major change in this fund has been the members of the management team. 3 weeks ago, I promoted Steve Brown as the new Deputy Chief of Training and EMS, who supervises this entire division as well as the training division. His position as EMS coordinator is now filled on the interim basis by Jennifer Pratt, and we will be bringing our new management analyst, Doug Gabbard, on staff May 1st. Included in these moves also includes transferring the EMS trainer position out of the general fund and into the EMS fund. This position is wholly responsible for emergency medical training of all of our personnel, and the cost for this employee is more appropriately charged to the EMS fund than the general fund. Last year, during a reorganization of the EMS division, I proposed reducing the EMS coordinator position to that of a lower classification. However, with all the changes over the course of the last year, I've elected to maintain this position for the time being, and will continue to evaluate that in the future. It's important to note, as we reduce resources in the fire department, our ability to provide backup ambulance coverage is also reduced. Moving forward, we need to continually evaluate our EMS fund balance. As you can see from the chart on the bottom of the slide, our beginning fund balance will drop to $2.37 million fiscal year 13-14. The division is actively seeking new billing clients to bolster revenues. We're in contact with several other cities and towns around that currently do not use our billing services, and so we're running this as a business, and we're recruiting new business to bolster those revenues. Also in December of 2012 this year, the Regional Ambulance Service Area Boundaries renewal rebid process will take place. Currently, we hold the franchise for ambulance service in the Salem area, and we will seek renewal of our existing franchise during this process. This concludes my presentation, and my staff and I stand ready to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
I have no one from the public signed up, so we'll go ahead with questions. Mr. George.
Yes, Chief, I noticed that on page 231, you've always had, as far as your FTEs, 5, and you went to 6, and what's that other, what's that one?
The addition is that...
And it looks like a 14.15% increase in cost.
That's the transfer I mentioned, the EMS trainer moving from the general fund to reduce costs in the general fund. And what he really does is EMS training, and
Okay,
so it should be in the EMS
So the
fund.
general fund went down by an
Transfer.
equal amount?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Member Nanki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In looking at the pie charts on the front end, bad debt at 11%, and you spoke of the amount of calls collecting like $8 million in revenue, so that's just shy of $1 million in bad debt. Is that after all collection attempts have been made?
That's bad debt for the city of Salem. The $8 million that I mentioned is revenue that from other agencies that we're collecting debt for. So our collection rate's hovering right about 52% of collection rate. So it's down with the economy, but that's pretty much the national average right now.
And that was going to be my follow-up question.
And we look to compare. Rural Metro has their own billing services, and so we look carefully at what their collection rates are. We're very aggressive with pursuing to collect every dollar we can, and those collection rates are reflected by what we're seeing in the national economy.
Okay, thanks.
Member Clem.
Thank you, Chair Bennett. Chief, the backup calls with the ambulances, we keep hanging on to these ambulances, and yet we have a transport company on contract. So give me some sort of or us an idea, if you could, please, of how many calls they actually go on. And the question is, do we really need all those, 4 ambulances?
Correct. We have 4 ambulances. In this year's budget, we recommend reducing to 3. So we're going to mothball one of those ambulances to see what the impact is going to be there. It saves us about $10,000 in operation costs. We'll take the radios, and we won't pay for fuel and those types of things. How we use the backup ambulances in the system is during peak deployment, which is the busiest hours of the day. Rural Metro has 9 ambulances in service. Those ambulances provide first response for critical emergencies. They do inter-facility transfers. They do basic life support things as well. In the slower hours of the day, in the evening, and the wee hours of the morning, they have 4 ambulances in service. Now, on an average day, the Salem Fire Department is asked to, we call it, provide a backup medic. In other words, move people from a fire truck over to an ambulance to stand by for the next call when there's enough calls in the system that there's no ambulances available. When we get down to 1 or 2 ambulances, we need to put another ambulance to be ready to respond. We actually go to a call at Salem for about half a call a day average. So we're not responding to that many calls. Of course, that affects our revenue too. If we go to less calls, we bill less calls. But we are the EMS provider. We have the responsibility to make sure that if someone needs an ambulance, it's provided. And so that's a service that we still have in the fire department, and that's why we continue to have those backup medics. I will tell you that we're going to evaluate that very carefully next year as we look at our resources and decide whether 3 is too many. I considered going to 2 this year, remaining as backup medics, but I want to kind of gradually take that down just so we don't go too fast.
Well, or if we have them, let's use them. And Mr. Chair, my second question, if I could. The renegotiation or the reestablishment by Marion County Commissioners of the ambulance service area will occur this year. Does it make sense that Salem wants to provide more service on the east side of town and expand its footprint, given that your budget's being proposed to be reduced?
The challenge there is if we expand our footprint, somebody else's footprint shrinks. And the county commissioners are the ones that decide where the boundary lines are for ambulance service areas. And we have worked closely with Marion County, Jefferson, Turner, Kaiser in this process leading up to this. And the direction from the commissioners was they didn't want any boundary disputes, or they didn't want to see boundary disputes during the process of the renewal. So we have worked with our partners to clearly define boundaries, but we're not looking at expanding to the urban growth boundary during this transition period.
Well, and I think they have budgetary issues as well. So have they indicated that they're wanting Salem to pick up more fire service?
We have had some conversations with them about that. Those are in the very preliminary stages, and we haven't made any decisions yet, obviously.
Okay, thank you.
Member Motley.
Thank you. I'm looking at an account 32642. It's on page 234, ambulance subscription fee. Is that I think it's $50 or something a year that people pay to?
That's our Capital Fire Med program.
Okay, that's the thing where they give you the money up front and then they don't get charged for beyond their insurance or something like that?
The copay, the balance of the difference between what insurance coverage.
My question behind that then is, have you done any studies or something is that really paying off for us in terms of profit and loss?
The way we manage that program is City of Salem doesn't take a loss on that. We collect for Marion County, Kaiser, and Rural Metro. We collect all the monies for that, and then we pay them out per subscription. City of Salem has taken its costs out of that. We're not losing anything. We are looking into this program. I can tell you that other agencies, Springfield area, have changed the policy on how they administer this. They're only covering 50% of the write-off instead of 100%. There's patients that kind of abuse this system and they use it as insurance. So we are taking a close look at that. We've met with all of our regional partners. While we administer the program, there's a lot of regional partners that play in this. And so for us to make changes to it, we're starting that process. But it is something we're evaluating whether or not this is a program that we would want to continue in the future.
Thank you.
Member Nanki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just follow up on the backup ambulance.
Okay.
A half a call a day average, what's the peak been? Because an average can be misleading. Have we actually ever deployed more than one ambulance of our own?
Yes, yes,
More
absolutely.
than two then? Because you talked about actually dropping to two.
Yes, we've deployed more than two. Depends
Okay.
on the call. I mean, if you have a call
Sure.
that's a busload full of kids, you're going to pretty much every ambulance in town there, you're going to call ambulance from out of town to come help you. I would say your typical call, we don't have that. We also manage this. There are times where they could call for a backup ambulance, and we may say, we're too low on our resources right now, and that call may go to Marion County, or that call may go to Kaiser, or that call may go to Turner or Jefferson, and they start moving an ambulance this way. So we balance that with the operational needs of the organization. If I have all my engines in service, then I'll put them in as a backup medic, and they wait for the next call. If they don't get the call, they jump back on the engine.
So we aren't the last best, and if we don't respond, it's not like nobody will. We have
That's
other
right.
backup.
It's a system-wide approach.
Right.
We do rely on our mutual aid partners, and you know, if we have a large fire going on where all of our resources are tied up, or nearly all of our resources are tied up, we balance that. So our on-duty battalion chiefs, our 24-hour chiefs, make those decisions all day long. They move crews around and they make those adjustments, and that's when we evaluated it, the chances of us using 4 ambulances at one time is pretty rare. So there's $10,000 of savings there, and that's what we're down to. We're down to the finding where we can find the small amounts, and that was one we could cut, so we cut it.
Excellent, thanks.
Chief, one of the most common questions I've had over the past several years as a counselor has been why a fire truck and an ambulance arrive at the same place. Could you give a...
Certainly.
Thanks.
This is an easy one because I've had to answer it so many times. The simple answer is we don't send a fire truck and an ambulance to every 911 call. Since 2007, we've used a system called Priority Dispatch. And we spend more time at the dispatch center, not much more time, but ask some more leading questions of the person calling in to better know what type of resource to send. Since 2007, we have queued out of our 10,000 or so, 13,000 or so ambulance calls a year that we respond to. We've got 1,400 of those have been queued out where we used to send an ambulance and a fire truck. Now we can send just a fire truck or just an ambulance. And so, as I said, it's a system-wide approach. And so if you have a call that comes in, for example, a heart attack, you need 5 responders to be able to treat you effectively. You need a driver for the ambulance. You need people in the back to administer medications. If you're in cardiac arrest, you need somebody to do CPR. You need somebody to defibrillate you. You need a lead paramedic. That's everybody. That's an engine company and an ambulance company together equal 5. If you broke your knee, maybe you only need a ride to the hospital, and so maybe we just send an ambulance to that. If you broke your knee in the top floor of your 3rd-story house and we have to carry you all the way down those stairs, maybe we need 5 people to get you safely down the stairs. So we really look at those calls. I could tell you that there's about another 400 calls, hopefully within the next year, that will be queued out. And so our hope by that is that with all these things together, with quick turnout times and proper positioning of resources, that the resources that are needed for the critical calls are most available most of the time. And so that's the short answer. There are times when if somebody calls and they got a broken leg and they say, I'm having a heart attack, you're going to get 2 resources because that's bad information on the caller side. But we quickly clear from those types of calls and leave the appropriate resources there.
Thank you. That was a really good answer to it. All of your firefighters are EMS trained?
They're all EMS trained. We have about a little over 120 paramedics, and the rest are required to be EMT basics. And that's another thing that we're evaluating. How many paramedics do we need in the system? When we ran the system ourselves, it was important to have that many. Now that we have a public-private partner that has a paramedic, you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. You don't need 5 paramedics on scene. So that's another thing that we're looking at evaluating is how many paramedics do we need in our system, and there could be some cost savings there as well.
And finally, Chief, I'm looking at your bad debt. What is your collection strategy on that bad? Do you sell the debt? Do you use a third party?
I would have to get back to you on that. I don't know if we sell that debt or not.
Okay.
I can tell you that we're very aggressive with how we go about our collections, and there's some calls that are automatic denials, Medicare and Medicaid calls. We actually go before the commission and testify and try to collect that it's medically necessary. That's the out that's often used is, well, that's not medically necessary, so we're not going to pay anything. And as you're aware of Medicare and Medicaid, you collect a lot less than what you can through private insurance. But if a lot of those are just automatically checked as not medically necessary, you collect nothing. We actively, for all of our clients, actively go and petition, and we win a lot of those cases and get paid for those. So I think our bad debt's where it is now. I think it would be worse if we didn't do that.
Chief, I would be interested in an answer on how you're handling the debt.
We can certainly get you an answer on
Thank you
that.
very much. Mr. George.
Yeah, just to follow up on Chairman Bennett's question on the fire truck and I heard your answer to that. I've heard it several times, and I understand that. But would it seem if we need additional personnel, would it make more sense to have another smaller vehicle like a van or some kind of a thing like that where the additional personnel, rather than sending out an entire fire engine with the whole thing? I understand there's cases where you need it, where there's an auto accident, where there may be, people need it for that. But I'm thinking about the heart attack thing that you brought up. Would it seem like that it would be more cost efficient to have something like that rather than keep putting the miles on these very expensive fire engines to do that? Have you given any thought to that?
We have. We used to have smaller, lighter vehicles, and they didn't last as long, and they were underpowered. And I guess what I would say, two answers to your question. The first answer is, with the way our resources, the amount of resources that we have, we don't have. There are other towns that have the squad cars that have one person in them, and they run around and they do, smoke investigations and stuff. The important part to note is that town didn't reduce the number of fire engines they had. They added that resource. We'd be happy to add that. It just costs money. I'm at the point where I can't reduce much more resources and split somebody up that way. The other thing is they could go to a heart attack call, get there, it's acid indigestion, the medic treat the patient, or the patient doesn't go to the hospital, and they're driving back to the fire station, and a fire comes in 2 blocks away. Now, if they're in their little van that can't fight fire, they got to drive back to the station, get their truck, and drive back to the fire. So having the right resources and the right tools at the right place at the right time is a challenge when you're covering 80 square miles. And we're doing that now with pretty limited resources. So if we spread that thinner, you're just going to have worse response times.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
Our next fund is the Cultural and Tourism Fund. I will alert you, we do have members of the public signed up for this, so we'll call on them and then ask questions.
Good evening, Chair Bennett, members of the Budget Committee. My name is Christopher Nider. I am the budget analyst for the City of Salem, and I am here tonight to present the Culture and Tourism Fund budget for fiscal year 12-13. Just a quick reminder, the revenues for this fund are coming from the transient occupancy tax, which is a 9% tax placed on overnight stays at our local hotels and motels. There are 5 major divisions within this fund: the Conference Center Support, Conference and Tourism Marketing, City Programs and Historical Buildings, Administration, and lastly, Major Tourist Attractions and Cultural Facilities, or grants. In Book 1, pages 193 through 200 is where you'll find this fund. And the proposed budget for fiscal year 12-13 is $2.4 million, comprised of $1.7 million in general operating expenditures, otherwise listed as materials and services, and $685,000 in other costs, which are comprised of $100,000 in contingency, $585,000 for transfer to parks landscaping maintenance, and $60,000 for capital improvements to city-owned historical buildings. The proposed budget anticipates a $228,000 decrease in resources due to a smaller beginning fund balance in 12-13. As seen on page 194, in comparing the fiscal year 11-12 beginning fund balance of $647,720 to the fiscal year 12-13's anticipated beginning fund balance of $423,000. The major changes for the budget for fiscal year 12-13 include the following increases: $29,820 for marketing in the Conference Center Support Division, and $173,740 for parks landscape maintenance in the City Programs and Historical Buildings Division. The decreases are $71,000 in conference tourism marketing going to Travel Salem, $77,000 in capital improvement projects, not counting the rebudgeted projects, $32,250 in administrative reduction costs, $121,590 in reduction to the major tourist and cultural facility grants, and $105,500 in contingency. The net result is a reduction of $256,180 in budgeted expenditures compared to fiscal year 11-12. Lastly, this budget reflects the Culture and Tourism Promotion Advisory Board's recommendation to fund all of the qualifying fiscal year 12-13 competitive grant awards as listed on pages 195 through 196, and support of the City Manager's 12-13 budget as recommended. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them to the best of my ability.
If you'll stand ready, we'll listen. I think we'll take a few minutes and listen to the folks that signed up.
Sure.
Great, thank you very much. Scott Snyder.
Good evening, Chair Bennett and board members of the Budget Committee. My name is Scott Snyder. I work at 201 Liberty Street Southeast in Salem here. I am the chairperson for the Cultural Promotion Tourism Advisory Board, as well as the president of the Salem Area Lodging Association. I'm here tonight to endorse the city manager's recommended budget for the TOT funding. While any reduction to funding of the cultural facilities and event support is definitely concerning, the board understands the strain that's being placed on the city. And although Travel Salem's part of the budget specifically is not part of our purview, we've had conversations with the director of Travel Salem regarding the $71,000 budget reduction, and Angie and her team are extremely positive and feel that they can still provide the core mission of their organization of promoting the community at large and bringing groups that will utilize hotel guest rooms within that $71,000 reduction. The Travel Salem facet is certainly the most concerning for the Lodging Association, is that they are our community's sales force for trying to bring visitors to the Salem area, in turn raising TOT revenue. But again, with Angie's confidence that they'll be able to work with groups that are looking at events for the future and marketing the community, the membership of the Lodging Association felt comfortable that those things would still get done, and endorsing the city manager's recommendations. And as Chris indicated, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have at this time.
Thanks, Scott. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Snyder? Mayor.
I have a question that you may not be able to answer, and so maybe it will need to be answered by staff following the public testimony. But I noticed that the revenue for the hotel motel taxes as projected from the adopted budget for this year of $2,238,900, the city manager's proposed budget indicates a hotel motel taxes at $2,216,000, so that's a decrease. And I'm wondering if between the adopted budget for 11-12 and the actual of what was experienced in, say, the first 2 quarters, maybe you could even estimate the first 3 quarters of 2011-12, are we on budget for the $2,238,900, or are we not even going to meet that projection?
In order to give you accurate information, I think Chris would probably have the most up-to-date figures for you.
Okay.
As regards to the tax that's coming in, it's coming in on target. We're just maybe 1% behind
Okay.
budget.
Okay, good, thank you.
Any more questions? Mr. Bailey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having just sat down and planned out a road trip for myself and my wife this summer and looked at lodging costs all across the country, 9% seems pretty modest. And I'm wondering what the stomach would be to increase that in the association. I mean, you know, people are traveling for a variety of reasons, and 9%, 11%, 12%, what's the difference? I mean, for the average traveler, not much, but for the city in aggregate, a lot. So I'm wondering what the attitude might be.
Well, I think that's a great question. I know that as a business owner, or I'm not a business owner, I'm a business operator, but we constantly look at our rates, and we do not want to leave a dime on the table. And I think that that is accurate for all hoteliers. If you look at the statistics for the amount of TOT that's been coming in as opposed to number of rooms sold, Salem has sold more rooms in the last year at a lower ADR. So they are not generating the same, they're generating the same dollar amount as Chris said, basically, but they're selling more rooms to get there. So they're giving away the rooms at a lower rate. That would tell me that most of the hotels in Salem are meeting resistance, and so they're lowering the rate to increase their occupancy.
Member Strozit?
Hi, Scott. I just wanted to make a minor correction to your excellent letter, and that is that when the hotel motel tax was raised from 6% to 9%, that was before the conference center existed, so that didn't really factor into it. It was for the historic properties, and it listed Deepwood, Bush House, and I think it listed Gilbert House as well, and other purposes as allowed by law, I believe was the way it was worded.
Okay.
And I just quickly, I want to say I've attended a number of top board meetings, and Scott always treats everyone very courteously and respectfully, so a person appreciates that when they see it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Member George?
Yeah, just as a comment, my kids are going down to Disneyland at the end of this month, and we put them up in we've got timeshare with Worldmark, and they're in a Worldmark unit down there for the 6 days. And Anaheim is charging $18 a day for their tax, hotel tax, for every single room. And I mean, I don't know how that works out to as a percentage, but still, they're paying $18 a day down there for that.
Yeah, that's high.
Yeah, it is.
They got Disneyland.
I say they are paying it, not me.
Yes, Mayor. Put a Disneyland in, maybe.
Mary has a question.
Well, actually, I would just like to offer a point of clarification, since it has been brought up. I'm speaking from the facts about ballot measure 2427 that was put to the voters in May 18th of 1999, when the proposal was to increase the transit occupancy tax from 6% to 9%. And it says in this fact sheet, the city proposes to use the additional funds to repair and restore historic attractions such as Gilbert House, Deepwood Estate, Bush House, and Bush Barn. Repair and restoration cost for the city's historic attractions is estimated at $1.5 million. The city also proposes to use the additional funds for other purposes currently permitted by the city charter, such as tourism promotion, cultural activities, and landscape maintenance of city historic areas and open space, including maintenance of the Riverfront Park. And then there are some other questions and answers, and then it further says, asks, does the city establish any other policies for these funds? And it says also the city council stipulated the percentage allocation to city programs would be automatically reviewed by the council after completion of the restoration and major repairs to the city-owned historic buildings. And so I think that it's important to note that the city worked very hard with our historic and cultural properties and has made a number of repairs and restorations. And so that's why we don't see that funding this year. But I want to just explain and reemphasize that there was a clear understanding with the voters that there would be funding for parks maintenance and for other items deemed appropriate by the city council following the restoration of those buildings. There seems to be some misunderstanding on the part of some of the people who've written to us or just spoken with us about it.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Yeah, great.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next is Peter Booth.
I like the picture. Peter Booth, Executive Director, Willamette Heritage Center, former Mission Mill Museum, resident 280 Culver, and work at 1313 Mill Street. Thanks, greetings, thanks for having me. I want to speak to the city's upcoming budget allocation, specifically to the TOT fund. I want to first state that we recognize the budget challenges that you all are facing, and we support the TOT board's endorsement of the city manager's recommendations. However, the Willamette Heritage Center specifically is concerned about what this signals as far as the city's investment in its partnerships with its cultural entities, especially since this TOT thing has been a very successful partnership over the years. We hope that it is understood that this proposed budget shift of over $100,000 away from the granting program, in addition from a shifting of budget away from our main marketing arm outside of this area, be it Travel Salem, will have its impact. And we hope that this is a significant, a temporary shift. However, if the cuts become permanent, or heaven forbid the cuts are deeper next year, then it will have a negative and start to have a degenerating effect on our local cultural community as well as our growing, or could be growing, tourism economy. It will benefit nobody. It will have the opposite effect and start deteriorating the local tourism economy, which is we have all worked so hard to build up, and which is one of the few growing economies in our area. This investment on the part of the city has not been wasted. On the contrary, the expenditures have one of the best returns ever. A recent U.S. Council of Mayors study found that for every $7 spent on cultural institutions that play into tourism, have seen every $1 invested have seen $7 in tax returns. And then that is in direct spending. That's not including multiplier effect. And we've seen that in the local Marion County since 1991. It's increased from $108 million direct spending to $224 million. So our concern, while endorsing the budget proposal, city manager budget proposal, our concern that it is not be made permanent and definitely not be made deeper in following years, for we fear that it'll start degenerating what we worked so hard to build, which is actually bringing money into the community, and it's not costing the community, the taxpayers themselves. It's a tax on visitors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booth. Member Dickey.
Thanks, and thanks for coming down. Yeah, I was curious to know, do you have a sense for how many visitors that you have at the Heritage Center that are from outside Salem? Not necessarily for a special event, but that would just come to visit the center itself?
Yes, we do take entrance survey if everybody comes, where their place of origins. It goes through the museum. The exact percentage I can't give you right now, but well over 50 to 60% are outside the mid-Willamette Valley area. And in addition to that, we do over 60 weddings a year, and our guess is that 10% to 15% of each of those wedding guests are from outside of the area.
Member Tesler.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask you a couple questions. One question has to do with when you see that these revenues are leaving TOT, does that drive your incentive to apply for grants outside so that you can kind of backfill what you might see leaving? Is that in your business plan to diversify your income and investments? I mean, does that spur that type of thinking and activity that, you know, you're probably a 501c3 or a C6, and so that gives you a little bit more power in applying for grants and looking for outside funding? I'm just curious if that's part of the business plan and the thinking.
Yes, we are a 501c3. And in 2010, we went through a very extensive strategic plan, which encompassed significant diversifying our income streams, earned income, as well as grants, as well as foundations, as well as development through other donations. And over the past 3 years, we have received over $300,000 worth of grants in addition to TOT grants. And so that is a significant effort on our part. However, the hole that is going to be left by a decrease in TOT is fairly significant, and we're already working full-time to get grants from elsewhere. So we are trying to diversify, but the TOT plays a very significant partnership that we want to build on.
And I just wanted to add a follow-up comment, is that I really think, Peter, that Mission Mill has really been a model of thinking out of the box as far as thinking about other streams of income, having events at Mission Mill that were not your typical type of event, to bring in different kinds of people and incomes. And I think that you would be a good model to others as maybe appealing to a different variety of audience than that they had in the past. Maybe a younger audience, or just a different audience that they have in the past. And I think that you've started to tap that. So I like to see that, because that shows that you're thinking about those things. You're diversifying your income. You're making your portfolio more attractive to other users than traditionally had come in the past. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Booth, I want to put in perspective the cut you're facing is $7,500 this year.
I think that is correct. I think
Okay.
that's about correct.
Okay. I just wanted to get it into perspective in terms of the hole that's being created. Second, and just a comment, and take it for what it's worth, but I want to just describe for you the problem we're facing in light of your request for next year and the year after. We are cutting, as you can see, this year, where was 3.5?
Well, $4.5 million total.
$4.5 million this year. Between now and the next budget cycle, the manager will have to save $3 million. Read save as cut. Next year, we will be asked to cut $3.5 million more. The following year, we will save, again, I would read that as cut $3 million, and the following year, we'll be back at it again for $3.5 million. I don't want to rain on your parade, but I think everyone needs to be alerted as to the problem and the management challenge, and for folks on the Budget Committee, the challenge we're going to face during that period. So I just want to kind of alert you to the kind of magnitude of issues facing the general fund, just to kind of get it in perspective.
And recognize that, and we recognize the challenges as the city faces. This is an economy that the city has invested in, and by these savings, these budget cuts, you're beginning to undercut a lot of the investments that do have a high return. And if this fund, the TOT fund, is the tax revenues are only going to drop $20,000, and and yet the cuts are far outweigh the little bit of tax drop that is occurring in the TOT fund. It'd be justifiable what you're saying, that we be cut a proportion that high if the tax revenue for the TOT was dropping that significantly too. This is an industry that paying the city, and I'd hate to see the investment the city has made in this to start deteriorating.
We'll look forward to next year.
Still like the picture.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey, do you have a question?
For you, sir, and that is, isn't the Cultural and Tourism Fund separate from the general fund?
I'm going to let the manager.
It is a separate fund, but we can, as the mayor explained, use some funds from the TOT fund to help with the parks maintenance costs for our
Certainly.
historic parks. And so we've had to, in this proposed budget, increase the amount that would go to parks operations so that we don't have to further reduce that parks budget. And it's potentially the case that there could be an increased reduction in the top fund next year if we have to make further reductions to keep any level of park service.
Okay. And the follow-up question then is, the advisory committee that puts together this list,
Yes.
is there a strategy here, or is it basically a wish list? I mean, I see a lot of worthy grant projects that in and of themselves are great, but I don't see a strategy here. And so I'm wondering if there's an opportunity within the context of this fund to think a little more strategically about how the city uses these, because as Mr. Booth says, this is a very important face of the city type of fund. And maybe we could be a little more strategic about how these are doled out.
There is a process the advisory board uses, and we have established criteria that the city council has approved for those decisions to try to take a strategic look at what should be funded and to what level. So there's always room for improvement. We've continued to improve this process over the last few years, but we do have very specific criteria that the board uses now.
Member Nanki.
Yeah, just that we've made significant changes in the last year, so.
Yes.
You know, we've all recognized that as well.
Member Williams.
Just a question to clarify. Thank you, Chair. Your comment, because we are cutting, or the proposal is to cut funding for some of these cultural institutions, those cuts won't necessarily be used to pay for police, but they offset some other cuts to general fund, which may free up funds for other costs that the council may find important to pay. So I want to make sure it's clear to the public that the $3 million, we can't really capture that by taking what I guess is called TOT funds.
Right. If we can reduce the general fund expense for parks, that leaves a little more general fund revenue available for police and fire and library and other general fund services.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Sandra Burnett.
Good evening, Chair Bennett, Mayor, and Budget Committee, and councillors. I want to just support what Peter has been talking about from the perspective of the cultural organizations in the city. I enjoyed the discussion, and I don't have a huge amount, and I don't want to be redundant, but there is a feeling from the cultural organizations that the TOT support has been chipped away. Originally, there was the talk of the tax when it went up from 6 to 9%, specifically to support cultural organizations, to support the facilities as the destinations for tourism. And that was prior to the conference center that then came on. and had a buffer. There was the buffer of 300,000 that, in a sense, became an entitlement each year, and now their revenues increased, while Travel Salem for marketing has decreased, as is the cultural organizations. So the concern really is, are we divesting in our cultural organizations when we should be investing more? Because cultural tourism is a very good industry. It generates revenues for the cities in taxes through the accommodations, but also for restaurants, for businesses all around. So cultural tourists stay longer than other tourists. It's 5.2 nights versus 3.4 nights, and so on. So it really is a question of strategy. Are we divesting in something that actually has the potential to drive economic improvement? Also, museums, theater, the arts, heritage, these are facilities in a city that drive development in other ways. The question posed in an article, Why Give to the Arts, is that would a community be a place that draws successful businesses if there wasn't a cultural environment that support the interests of the people to run those businesses? So it is seen as an important economic driver. Bob Lynch of the New York Times points out that 5 million jobs in the U.S. come from the arts. And it generates $30 billion in taxes. So we need to it's not so much that we don't appreciate what the budget committee is facing, what the city manager is facing, but just that as a strategy, just to bear in mind how important the cultural environment is to the success of a city. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Clausen.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Thank you, Ms. Burnett. So something that's going to be interesting for me on this, and I'd be curious about your opinion, to be watching this for next year, I just wrote myself a question to follow up when we get to this point next year. Would you expect to see a drop in revenue for the TOT fund based on the divesting in the cultural and tourism type events versus the transfers to parks being increased?
I think tourists are attracted to the cultural destinations, if we're talking about cultural tourism. Parks are a really important part of the infrastructure of a city, but there are very few parks in the world that tourists are specifically come to that city to visit. They may visit an event in the park, the Art Fair, Multicultural Institutes, the World Beat. But, so I think, yes, divesting in your cultural institutions would have an impact on tourism.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind helping me watch that for next year and remind me of the question, it will be interesting to find out. I've got my question written here, but it's a big book, so.
Well, we do work hard on diversifying our funding sources. And Salem Art Association has worked really hard in this last year and has increased grant revenue by a significant degree.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Burnett? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Maria McRae.
Good evening, Mayor Peterson, Chair Bennett, Budget Committee, and City Council members. My name is Maria McRae. I'm a resident of Salem. I'm president of the Board of Directors of the Oregon Symphony Association in Salem. For the last 56 years, we have been bringing the nationally renowned Oregon Symphony to Salem, bringing quality music through our classical, pops, youth, and special concerts. We also make a major impact on the music education programs in the Valley through our youth outreach, Wisconsin, Musicals, Take 10, and master coaching classes. Yearly, we have been bringing between 9 and 10 concerts to the Salem community. This upcoming year, we will be bringing 11 concerts to our community. You won't need to go down to Anaheim to see Disney. It will be here this upcoming year through the Oregon Symphony. We have been bringing quality music here for this length of time. This year, we have submitted 2 grants. One of them was denied the opportunity to be considered due to a technicality. Thanks to some assistance, however, that was reinstated. And we were rated a little low, I believe, because of the technicality. The grant asked to have dates submitted by December the 19th. We could not give specific dates of the concert by that time. Because of trying to deal with all of these different agencies, their agents and everything else, we're still having a couple of dates with Pink Martini, who's coming back next year, but trying to get the final date down is really hard on all of these different venues. We think that we make a huge impact to Salem. We have people coming from over 30 cities, as well as other states and countries. Last year, we created a Meet Me for Dinner program. We feel that it's not only important for people to come to the Oregon Symphony to see the symphony, but also to give back to the community. And we support the businesses and the restaurants here with our Meet Me for Dinners. We tell the restaurants, we'll be at your restaurant this night before the concert. The next concert, we go to a different restaurant. We've been supporting Jonathan's, Prudence and Cork, Jonathan, La Margarita. We try and do different ones for different concerts. The other collaboration that we have created this last year is with the Phoenix Grand Hotel. And we have been bringing people from the coast. We want them to stay in Salem. We want them to feel that they have a vested interest in it, and the next day they can go out and shop in all of the different places, go out for breakfast and everything. So we're trying to build our community and make it a better place for everyone concerned. We are one of the brilliant programs that helps sell businesses, Salem to businesses, employees, and agencies. We are one of the reasons people come to Salem. I hope you will see the value in funding our programs along with the other cultural programs here in Salem. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Mayor.
I have a question or a comment, and of course, you know, this is my disclaimer, that you know that from my years on the Oregon Symphony Association and Salem Board, that my heart is with you.
Thank you.
And I'm pleased to note that actually in the mayor's proposed budget that the Oregon Symphony Association in Salem is receiving 2 grants, and one is for the concerts and the other is for musicals.
Yes.
So it's $7,500 and $4,000. So that's actually, if I'm looking at this correctly, $4,000 more in funding than you had received.
And we're collaborating with other venues here in town, with Mission Mill and Deepwood and the Carousel, to actually we can bring the musicians in, they have the locations for us, and then we're trying to go together to bring all of the people from all of the different places so that they support Salem. We think Salem's wonderful, and we want to continue to keep it thriving for the future.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And you just used my favorite word, collaboration. We are the collaboration capital, and you're doing it. So
Yes,
thank
we are.
you. Thank you.
We're growing, and I want you also to know that we have taken a look at our program. We are going through a major transition this year, as most of you have heard or seen, and we are cutting our costs. We're cutting our budget by $60,000, and for us, that's a huge difference. Our total budget is around $500,000, so cutting us by $60,000 is a major part. But we do need the funding for at least 1 year to kind of get us over that so that we can continue in the future. And really do thank all of your support.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. That's the end of my list of members of the public to testify. Is there anyone else that would like to testify on the Cultural and Tourism Fund? Okay, thank you very much. Document Services.
Any questions of staff?
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Connie, I'm sorry. Member Nanke?
Yeah, just for anyone else who had questions, staff, Counselor or Budget Member Clausen had the reminder in his book, and I would figure that's something staff could bring back as well, and it would be actually part of their presentation for budget next year as far as revenue?
Yes, we've made a note of that.
Thanks.
Member Strozen.
I talked to Mark Bechtel before the meeting, and he said he could easily bring back a breakdown on page 124, bottom of the page, historic and city landscape maintenance. In years past, apparently not last year, but in years past, we had itemized so we could see which properties were getting which amount, and Mark said that is something that they could bring to us. So I would like to see that information next week or sent out by email.
Excuse me, is the question which properties will be getting what amount from
It's a
the top
breakdown
revenue?
of the landscape maintenance under Todd, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Member Nanki?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, and a follow-up back to previous discussions on the 6 to 9% and what have you. A lot of our facilities, cultural and tourism facilities, back in the late 90s were in very poor shape. Hence the increase to the 9%. I think that we've done a wonderful job in taking care of those, and that was the primary impetus. Plus then, what could we do after that was finished? And I think we've been true to the intent of the original passage to the voters. And actually, it's actually helping them out right now, keeping a few things open more than they would be. But we've always, pulled the park maintenance for those facility areas out of general fund as well, when we could have actually been, supplementing that through this program, which Bush House would look really crappy if the park around it was, 14-inch high weeds and dandelions. So, there's a direct nexus there to the cultural facilities.
Thank you, Member Nanki. Mayor?
Yeah, I just have a quick comment, and actually the people I should be making this comment for have left the room, but I'll make it anyway because it goes on the record, and that is that in looking over the list of organizations that apply each year for top funding, worthy as they are, I'd like to have more of the nonprofit organizations in Salem looking at the tremendous model that Mission Mill and the Marion County Historical Society provided when they combined forces, thereby reducing some of the overhead. I know we have several arts organizations that independently have boards of directors and executive directors, and the same thing is true of some of the musical organizations, and I think that collaboration and combinations are going to be the byword as we move forward in a new economy. You're going to hear me saying the same thing when we are looking at the social services budget. We simply cannot continue supporting the numbers of administrative costs that we're facing in similar services. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Member Dickey.
Yeah, just for clarification, since Member Bailey brought up the question about increasing the top fund, I think I know this, but for the benefit of the public, if that ever became part of the discussion, what is the process? Does that have to go to a vote of the people? Could someone clarify that?
Yes, I could, and I'll see if anyone wants to argue with me. It would require a charter amendment. I believe it's in our charter at 9%.
Maybe I can have
Somebody
Mr.
that
Tosh
knows?
come forward.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it is not in our charter.
It is not?
It is not in our charter.
Wow.
It was originally authorized by an ordinance that was referred to the voters, and I can't remember the year. Currently, there is a state law gloss on increases to TOT funds, and it's been a while since I've looked at the statute, but I believe that there are some limitations on how much you can increase it and how those funds can be spent. I'd be happy to get back with you on it.
It's in an ordinance, so it can be increased without a vote.
It can be increased without a vote, that's correct. But like I said, there is a state law, some state law limitations on it now.
Okay, thank you. Member Nanki.
Was that an advisory vote then in '99?
I believe it was actually referred to the voters.
Okay.
Originally, the Salem Charter had a specific provision in it related to taxation, and there was also some case law that related to taxation, and that was why it was originally referred to the voters. Back, I think the original TOD, I believe, dates back into the 80s, maybe even the 70s. The 70s. So originally it's always been an ordinance.
Okay, thanks.
Mayor.
Excuse me, Mr. Tosh, I have a question, and that is that this document, which I appreciated receiving from you, that talks about the ballot proposal for the increase of the TOT fee from 6% to 9%. indicates that it's a charter amendment increasing the tax rate. And so I'm thinking that it must be in the charter. Yeah, as it says here, the city charter provides that revenues from this transient occupancy tax must be used for, and then it gives the 4 specific things. So
That's right.
apparently,
You may be right, Mayor. The authorization for the TOT is in the charter, and I'm not sure about the rate. The rate may be set by ordinance. It's
so
in the
this
charter,
says
too?
it's a charter amendment, but anyway, well.
Why don't we have you
do
come
some
back?
research.
Oh, okay.
We'll bring that back.
Yeah.
Okay, there are some limitations, though, imposed under state law that would make an increase maybe not as attractive as it appears at first blush.
Okay, thank you. Member Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick for the manager, on the contingencies, I'm assuming the reduction from 200,000 plus to 100,000 is just budgeting, it wasn't needed. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
we think 100,000 will be adequate.
Sure, there's
from
not a
our
whole lot
past
of
history.
unknowns in this fund. So, all right, thank you.
Member Nank.
Yeah, just follow up on the TOT tax. Actually, that's redundant. The TOT, if that could be something that we look at the Finance Committee for council, since there is an ongoing section for alternative revenue.
Yes, we can do that.
One thing I think, Member Nanki, that might be helpful in our next meeting would be for these any kind of revenue option to become part of a recommendation from the Budget Committee might be a thought. Not that it limits the council action, but it might be helpful if there's...
Have a recommendation.
Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. Let's see. Document services, Connie. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Madam Mayor, members of the Budget Committee. My name's Connie Manel. I'm the HR Director as well as the IT and Facilities Director at this point. And I'm happy to be here tonight. That means we're halfway finished with this. So Document Services Division is a small division within IT. Several years ago, it was transferred over to our GIS supervisor, who is Sue Bloom, and she's done an outstanding job in taking over this division. This represents centralized reprographics, duplication, mail services. And as you can see from this department, in this department, there has been some significant reductions in this budget as well. There was a 16% reduction. Those reductions are occurring in the material and services, which includes decreases in the mail, and we also have rate reductions in contracted services. We've reduced printing and duplication services, and we've also had some reductions in our professional services. Are there any questions pertaining to this particular division?
Nobody signed up, so
Okay.
No friends of document services.
the next.
So next, we're going to go to our facilities fund, and this is also a very small division in facilities, and our facilities supervisor is Ty Godfrey. The purpose of the shop facility maintenance is for our shops facility. It provides the maintenance for the complex and the repair of outside and inside of the grounds at the city shops area. There has been some reductions in this division as well, and those reductions primarily have occurred in some of the electric cost, refuge, and some of the interdepartmental charges. That concludes my presentation for this.
Any questions? All right, thank you very much. The self-insurance fund.
No people signed up for that. Okay.
There's no one on
Once again,
it?
Connie
No.
Manel, and I'm here to talk about the self-insured fund. And the self-insured fund is composed of benefits and risk management. And as you can see, this is a very large fund. Our projected increase is $31 million. And I just wanted to point out, and perhaps there's a few new people here, but the city is self-insured, which means we pay our first dollar losses on all of our claims for both benefits, workers' compensation, and liability. We purchase excess insurance through consultants, and so we also are required to maintain a reserve. So we are our own self-insured fund. Going first to the benefit side of it, the city's health insurance fund supports 3,621 lives of approximately 1,100 employees and is managed by our benefits manager, Carrie Bailey, who's relatively new to the city. And as you can see, this is a large, costly program, and the premiums are charged back to the departments for revenue purposes. Most employees are also required to contribute a certain amount to the premiums. Retirees and COBRAs are required to pay 100% of all premiums. The health insurance program is based upon a calendar year, January to January. So when we begin budget preparation, we have a little bit of difficult time because there's a lag. And we really don't finalize our projected increases for the next calendar year until late August and 1st of September. So it may change just based upon what our claims experience. Just taking a look at our operating expenses, that is where we pay our third-party administrator. And we recently changed over last year, as a matter of fact, to a new third-party administrator. They have done a very good job for us keeping our costs down. And we are anticipating a slight decrease in terms of actual charges. Our excess insurance, we were self-insured for the first $150,000 of each claim. And our excess insurance is based upon the number of claims that exceed that stop loss, the $150,000. In prior years, we haven't had as good as luck as we'd like to have had, but our claims, our excess claims are 10 to 15 per year. So that's kind of reflected in what we're expecting in terms of our excess insurance costs going up. The good news is this current year we only have 2 claims that are close to the stop loss, and so we're hoping that $2.2 million will be brought down by January of next year. On the reserve program, we use actuarialists to assist us in setting our reserves, and you will see this in all of the accounts, the benefits, the workers' compensation and liability. That is to fund future claims costs and plus also to cover any expenses that were unanticipated as a result of claims. Claims expenses are the actual dollars that we pay for those claims, and that's consistent with not only the benefits but also with the workers' compensation and the liability claim too. So what's the impact? Like I said, we changed the TPA. We have had some cost savings in that. And I mentioned our excess insurance. One of the things we have been doing is working with our employee groups, and we have had, and we've passed on or cost shared some of the premiums and deductibles with our employees, and that has had some impact upon our overall program. What is significant is in our prescription cost for this last year, we were able to reduce our cost $314,000, which is significant. We changed our third-party administrator. We were paying our previous administrator some pass-through cost that exceeded $100,000, and then we revamped our our prescription program with minimum and maximum dollars amounts. Once again, cost sharing, passing it on to the employees, but the cost saving is pretty significant to the fund. What we're looking at for next year is, of course, ongoing plan design review. We're going to be entering negotiations once again and taking a look at our entire program. So future impact, as we all know, Federal Health Care Reform Act, we're not quite sure what the impact is going to be once the Supreme Court gets done with it. We're not anticipating a whole lot of either savings or expense to that. But the state health care reform is following what the federal is doing. We're investigating additional wellness programs, and I say those are soft dollar costs because we may have to invest a little money up front, but long-term costs we're hoping to reduce our overall cost. And then we have out there is the state assessment cost. There's some some additional discussions about increasing state assessment cost to self-insured and fully insured programs. I just wanted to show you that the claims cost, as you can see, the law changed in 2011 with the national health care. We were anticipating some huge dollar increases, but what we've done with the cost reduction to the program, we are really staying at the current status. We had in the 5-year forecast a 12% increase. With things going the way they are, we're looking at under 10%, and we're hoping closer to a 5% come January 1st. This particular slide shows our vision, dental, and medical costs during the last 5 years. My goal for the next few years before I retire is to see that column go down for medical insurance. The next is in the workers' compensation and liability. Once again, this is a large fund. One of the things I would like to say about the ICAP, we fund under this program for the liability, we fund a legal assistant and a lawyer underneath this fund. Our operating expenses are for a third-party administrator for both funds. Our excess insurance, once again, we have stop-loss insurance out of this fund. For both workers' compensation and liability, we have a $500,000 per claim. But also in this account is we have to purchase property insurance, and we purchase boiler insurance. We have specialized insurances such as the bomb squad and some of the others, and this is all in the excess insurance account too. Reserves are once again set based upon actuarial recommendations, and our claims expenses are anticipated claims expense. Workers' compensation, it's kind of interesting, these pictures. The first picture on the left-hand side, I will say that there was no injuries. Everybody came out safe. This happened a couple years ago. Unfortunately, we had to find places where seniors could live while we repaired the house and the truck was repaired. The second one down, the tree took out 12 cars over in our city shops. The good news is it was cars that were confiscated by some of the criminals in our area, and we were able to sell them for metal salvage purchases. Of course, the flood is the most recent. The good news is I had to go back 2 years to get some of those other pictures. The good news is on the flood, we had close to 120 people call our risk manager. We had about 5 claims. So far, we haven't had any ongoing lawsuits or anything. We've been able to assist our citizens in resolving some of their insurance costs.
And this was with your iPhone right out the front door of your house, I'll bet.
Yes.
Yeah.
In terms of workers' compensation, what's going on there? Things are pretty well status quo. We did transfer the funding for the risk manager over to the liability. He spends more time in the liability and the excess insurance. The liability claims costs have gone down significantly. The actual claims have gone down significantly this year, and we're hoping they continue. Let me go back to workers' compensation. This just shows the number of claims for workers' compensation. It has been going down. We've also seen a trend. We were at 141 and for this year we're at 129 for 11/12. You can see in the fire department, what we started about 2 years ago, we were sending our actual cost out to the different departments, and fire department is paying a lot of attention. They're trying to reduce the cost of their claims, and it's too bad they left, because this is a good, attaboy for the fire department. They've done a very good job in trying to reduce their overall cost. The problem with the fire department, when they have claims, they are severe injuries, and they're a little bit more costly. Police department, while it looks like they have a lot of claims, there are more first aid types of claims. Public Works is our third department in terms of claims. But overall, our costs are down in workers' compensation as well. Liability claims, last year in 11/12, we spent over $1.2 million. This year, the current cost of our claims, we're at about $300,000. We're estimating at the end of this year, we're going to be at closer to $42,000. We have hired a real aggressive, excellent legal attorney, Ken Montoya, who's done a great job for us in the litigation end of it. And I think some of the reduction I can attribute to his participation with this. So he's done a great job. What happens in all of the reserve, in all of the accounts, if we have excess money at the end of the year, we will rebate it back to the department or give it back to Linda, and she'll put it to whatever department. So the liability claims, we're hoping that we'll be able to tell Linda, you have some extra money here. And that concludes the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Member Motley.
If we can, is it permissible to go back to document services? Document services?
Sure.
Document services, I believe, is an internal service fund, and we're operating at a $102,000 loss. I don't understand why we would start off that way from the get-go. We have estimated expenses. We're paying ourselves, so why aren't we generating our revenue so that it's a break even? I mean,
So which page are you on, please?
well, 274 is where I did my calculation. That's the resources page.
And we've reduced that budget by $242,000.
Okay. So we're using some of the money that we're using some of our retained earnings, got to go back to that from last week, to fund operations. But as an internal service fund, we shouldn't need to do that. We should be requiring the revenue to cover the required expenditures. That's the way an internal service fund works. And I don't understand why we're not doing that.
Let me make sure or Ms. Neville, is there something you wanted to say?
I'm hoping I can answer the question. Thank you. First of all, before I answer this question, I'd like to refer you to page 271, which is where we outline our proposed expenses and revenue. You'll see in this case, the revenue of 1.96 or $2 million exceeds our expenses by about $400,000. Now, to answer your specific question back on 274, we made a concerted effort in the last couple of years to actually reduce our ending balance so that we would not have more than, I believe it was, three months of operating expense on hand. We felt that the amount in ending balance or retained earnings was higher than that amount, and it didn't need to be so large. So in turn, we were able to save the departments that we end up charging the dollars by reducing that ending balance. We were, in a essence, returning those funds back to the departments. And now our rates, we hope, are where they need to be to maintain that balance.
So, okay, so we are intentionally spending our retained earnings in order to reduce our retained earnings balance.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Member Bailey.
Thank you, sir. I was intrigued by your statement about the linkage between the increase in medical costs every year and the reduction in the rate of growth due to the federal legislation, the National Health Care Insurance. Without going into too much detail, why is that true? What's the linkage?
Well, the linkage was when the federal law was changed, we added like 114 dependents onto the program. And what we did over the course of the year through negotiations, we passed on some of those costs to employees. So we anticipated that had we kept everything status quo with the legislation, we would have seen some significant increases. But what we did through the negotiation process and passing some of the costs out to the employees and trying to do a little bit better job in cost containment, we actually saw almost a status quo, and in some areas a slight reduction like we did with the prescriptions.
And was any of that actually, I mean, the ability to do some negotiated cost containment, was that due to specific new language that allowed you to do that, or just in the encouragement to do the negotiated cost containment?
No, we had to bargain. We had to bargain that.
Okay, I had one question. You mentioned that retirees purchase insurance from us. Is that part of the contract, or how does that work?
That state law requires us to offer the group insurance programs to retirees till age 65.
And how are they charged?
They're charged, we charge them a 3% administrative fee, a 2%, so it's 100% of the premium plus a 2% administrative fee.
Okay.
Monthly.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, Member Clausen.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciated Member Motley's question. It brought up a question probably for the manager. When we look at spending down some of these funds, beginning working capital or the retained earnings, as Member Motley titled it, I see that as kind of spending down savings within the city, which in essence reduces the impact of lost revenues. Is that a large amount? Are we doing that? Is that a common thing across these funds that we're spending down beginning capital? Because if it is, obviously next year's impact is harder.
We review that very carefully every year, and I would say every year it may happen in one fund, maybe two, although that would be unusual. So we know the level of reserves we need to have and what our beginning fund balance should be. And then we budget for what we think our experience will be with claims. And if our claims experience is down and we have more savings, and we know we don't need to keep in that one case more than 3 months of reserves, then we can rebate that back to the departments and use for direct services. So it happens very rarely. We did it in reprographics. Once in a while, we've done it in health insurance, but not very often.
Okay, so this year, when I look around, I probably won't see a whole lot of that.
No, you won't.
Spending down the capital. All right, thanks.
Mayor?
Yes, thank you. I do have a question probably for the city manager or for staff, I'm not sure, so I'll ask my question. So I understand that with regard to reserve funds, that the reserve funds that we need to have on deposit for liability coverage is based on our history of liability claims. Is that correct?
That's part of it.
That's part of it?
Yes, it's
Okay.
based upon our current claims activity as well. Every other year, we send out our claims and our activity and our cost and have an actuarial list recommend to us what our reserve level should be. In some years, it may be a little higher because we've had some significant claim activity, or we are aware that there may be something going to litigation in the future in the next 2 or 3 years, which we will increase our reserves for those specifics. But we work with an actuarial. It's based upon claims history as well as current claims and potential future claims as well.
Okay. And then the second part of my question has to do with insurance coverage. Since we will be employing about 50 fewer employees in the 2012-13 year compared to this year, does that mean that the reductions in workers' comp and other insurance costs will show up in these figures that we're just looking at, or does it show up in each department's budget?
There will be some slight decreases in department budgets, but when we're looking at the total self-insured account, it will not show up till the future because there may be some claims that we have to address from the future, even the laid-off employees. So we budget in the risk management account for our current claims and potentially future. But there were reductions into some of the departments because obviously, if their premiums are based upon 110 people, they're down now to 90, their actual cost will go down because it's just less employees.
I see, but if our employee numbers, for instance, stayed at less 50 next year and the next year and the next year, would we begin to see a decrease in the amount of money that we place in reserves and that we estimate for those costs?
You could, based upon claims. Yes,
Okay.
you could.
Yes,
Okay.
if we had a number of large claims that made up the difference between the number of people we lose, then there probably wouldn't be much difference. But normally, we'd expect to see that in the second year forward.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, our next fund is the Economic Improvement District Fund.
Good evening, Chair Bennett and members of the Salem Budget Committee. I am Deborah Bond, the Administrative Services and Finance Director for the city. And I'm starting with the Economic Development Fund here, which you found on page 190 and 199, or excuse me, 190 and 191 of your proposed budget. This is a pass-through fund. So the purpose of this fund is basically to receive in the assessment and then to disperse it to who we have contracted with as our administrator of the programs. So this is not about the programs as much as it is passing that money through. Fiscal year 12-13 will be the first year of a full year of assessment on the 3-year assessment for the district. In 11-12, the district was enacted in December, so the assessment was only for 7 months. The city acts as the assessment collector for the district, providing billing and collection services once the district is formed and approved by the council. So for the coming year, the assessment to be collected, including penalties and interest, is $236,000. The expenditure budget for the district includes a disbursement of $224,250 to the Salem Downtown Partnership. They have a service agreement with the city to receive the funds collected from the city and then provide for the services to complete the economic improvements within the district. This agreement is managed by the Urban Development Department. The remaining part of the expenditure budget is $11,750 to be paid to the general fund, basically to provide administrative collection and billing services for the assessment district. And that concludes my presentation, Chair.
Are there any questions? I do want to point out to you, I gave each of you, and they're on the side as well, shopping and dining in downtown Salem. This economic improvement district is in my ward. This is one of the printed items delivered by the contractor. I thought it might be of interest to you to just see what they're up to.
Very fresh smelling.
And they are, these are very fresh smelling. Okay, any other questions? All righty. Do you have another
Continue
one?
on. Mm-hmm.
Which one do you have?
This will be the Fleet Services Fund, Chair.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And hopefully I can drive here. And I can't drive. Oh. Wow, thank you. This one. It's new technology for me this year. Before I begin, I'd like to introduce Don Thompson, who is the Fleet and Warehouse Superintendent for the city. The Fleet Services provides for the services of the city's fleet for administration and fuel services, acquisition and disposal of those fleet units, the repair, the maintenance, and the parts for servicing the fleet, as well as the central warehouse. The recommended budget for 12-13 is $9.5 million, and it really represents a little over a 2% decrease in the prior year's budget. Over the next 3 years, the Fleet Services Department or Division will be making significant changes to the service delivery to better meet the changing service needs for the city departments and control the fleet costs, and provide for a stable funding base to address the replacement of the fleet over its useful life. The next year is the first year of those changes to the fleet service delivery, which is on your screen. The major changes include how we will bill our customer departments for fuel costs. Up until now, that was included in what is called the rental rate, or the revenue side of this fund, and it included your repair, maintenance, and service costs, fuel costs, and a portion of that for the replacement of the fleet. As part of trying to create a better accountability around the cost of the fleet and allow the departments more of control over their fuel costs, we have broken out that cost separately, and it is now billed and will be billed separately from this point forward to each department, providing them a greater level of control over the consumption of the fuel. We can't control the dollar cost on the per gallon rate here, but we can hopefully create some awareness and start to control the usage and consumption of that fuel. Reducing the size of the fleet is also another consideration that we have done with the departments over the last 6 months, and will be continuing our efforts to working with these departments to match their service needs and the delivery of the equipment they need to what we actually maintain and charge for in the fleet. Additionally, we are looking at and have deferred some of our replacement needs in the coming year. The caution around that being is we're extending over the useful life of those vehicles. However, we look at the condition of that fleet unit, we look at the mileage on it or the hours of running usage, and converse with the customer departments around, does it make sense for us to maybe carry that piece of equipment for another year, and therefore reduce again the amount of money that has to go into the replacement of that vehicle in the coming year. And finally, we're looking overall at revamping our service needs to meet what our departments are creating as a workload into the fleet services area, and that is the staffing changes you see on the screen. We are basically doing a lot of work in the swing shift area. We are reducing the size of the staff in the swing shift by eliminating the supervisor, and in this case, we will have one of our technicians serve as a lead position. And we also have eliminated 2 fleet service technicians, so basically the size of the swing shift now will be 3. 1 will be a lead and 2 will be service technicians. The shop's supervisor position will be eliminated as of June 30th. The 2 fleet service technicians were laid off in February. We've also eliminated a fleet parts specialist position, again, would have serviced the swing shift staff. That was done through attrition. And we have reduced a full-time staff assistant who retired in December of this year to a part-time position. Some of the service impacts, I think, over the long run are going to be a very positive thing for the city. One of them is a better alignment of our service levels with the workload we're actually seeing coming into the shop, making us more competitive around the rates that we actually do charge to our departments. We have improved, as I said earlier, our accountability around our fueling costs, and hopefully we will be able to work collaboratively with the other departments around how to manage and become more fuel efficient, not only with what we bring into the fleet, but how they use their existing fleet today. Possible downside, of course, is in the equipment replacement area. If we continue to extend the life of a piece of equipment that is in the fund, we could see increases in maintenance costs or possible downtime of that equipment. Right now, the fleet pretty much prides itself in having over a 98%, almost 99.5% availability rate on anything in the fleet on any given day of service to our departments. But this is, again, a place where we will just continue to manage that work with our departments and try to basically keep our downtime and the older fleet at a more manageable level. And that concludes my presentation, Chair.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah, I knew it.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, member, please.
Thank you. I do have a couple of quick questions, and I apologize if I'm asking questions that everyone is
Excuse
already
me, can
familiar
you
with.
speak right
Sorry.
into the microphone?
Sorry.
We just can't hear otherwise.
Sorry. I apologize if some of these questions you already know the answer. One of the questions I have is under fleet replacement, the equipment.
I'm sorry, but I can't hear you.
Still can't hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, you really have to speak right into the microphone.
Or yell.
Yeah, that helps too.
Under equipment, the equipment replacement, the 1.4 million, can you tell me a little bit about the type of equipment? I guess one of the questions I have is, this type of equipment, is it shared between the departments?
You'll find a complete list on page 261, which shows you exactly what we will be replacing in the next year.
Okay.
Depending, again, this is what we call fleet-owned, so the Fleet Services Fund owes them, but we are servicing them as a provider to a particular department. Does that answer your question? So then If it's a patrol car, it is charged to police. If
Right.
it is a dump truck, it may be owned by Public Works, but used possibly exclusively in transportation or parks, depending on
Okay.
the need there.
So I guess just to follow up with that, the equipment then, just so I'm clear, the equipment can be shared, other than equipment such as patrol cars, but other types of equipment, is that shared between departments for the city?
When if I could, when it makes sense to do that, we do share it. But some of it, street sweepers, we have
Right.
some very specialized equipment that doesn't happen. But when it can, definitely we do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Who had their hand up? Member Clausen.
I just wanted to be clear on I'm looking at page 253 and looking at the increase in internal revenue. Is this, so the Fleet Services Division with the kind of reorg that you mentioned is probably going to be taking in a little more revenue to help cover costs better? Is that the intent? Is that kind of what's going on there with that $1.4 million increase in internal revenue?
Councilor Clausen, what you see there is what we're projecting on the revenue side. So there was a 4% increase over the prior year cost. So that's part of what that increase is just the natural inflation of what we think the cost will be to cover our salaries and other costs that we have to pay for in relation to those salaries.
We increased fuel actually a couple
Yes,
of times as we were putting this budget together. So that's gone up quite a bit.
Right, so the overall increase was about 12%, 4% being for that just natural cost of providing service, but the rest of it was in fuel.
Okay. Thanks.
Member Nanki?
I think just a clarification on the lead on swing shift. That person will be providing normal service technician functions outside of any supervisory type and oversight.
That is correct, Counselor.
Any other questions? Yes, Member George.
I'm just trying to reconcile on page 256, no, excuse me, 258, I'm sorry. What would fall into a contingency fund of $600,000? That's an awfully big number. And because I'm looking back on the original page, and it says you have 2.861820 on page 255, includes a fund or a contingency. What would you put into that fund?
Gasoline. We are very concerned about the volatility that's going on in the market now, and if you were aware of last year's contingencies, pretty much $300,000. Fortunately, we did not have to spend it. We could do it out of the line item for fuel appropriation, but this year we are concerned about what might happen in the next 12 months with what is happening with fuels. And so this is just increasing that amount with the anticipation of knowing that our departments are now going to try and manage their own costs of fuel. We still have to buy it. We're trying to make sure as we transition into this direct billing, we have basically covered of the volatility of the market.
Yeah, I like that idea, like making the department responsible for their own, that they may be a little bit more interested in managing the cost if they don't have to worry about paying for it.
Exactly.
So that's a good idea. Thank you.
How much fuel do you use a year? Either a dollar or volume or both? How much fuel is used by the city?
I'm going to let Don basically provide that answer.
I think it was about 1.6 million.
Something.
Yes. Mr. Thompson, do you want to come to the microphone? Mr. Thompson, would you come to the microphone?
He's the shy type.
Sorry, Don Thompson, Fleet and Warehouse Superintendent. Our fuel costs in fiscal year 10-11 amounted to $1,274,974.
And for this in 12-13?
Current year or the coming year?
The coming year. I think that was a question.
It's under the diesel and gasoline lines. On page...
Page 259.
259, yeah. We have lines for gasoline and diesel fuel, and we have budgeted 230, oops, I'm looking at the difference, I'm sorry.
I think
about
altogether it's about 1.5.
1.5.
65.
Yeah, it's 1.5.
Yeah.
So significant increase.
Wow. So that's a substantial increase. What are your assumptions on per gallon costs for gasoline over the next year? It might help out our viewing audience as they plan their budgets.
Good question, Chair. When we put this together, again, the markets were swinging, and what we did with providing a fixed per gallon rate to the departments to start to manage to, for diesel, it's $3.65, and for unleaded fuel, 3.61. And that does include a 10% markup for our administration, because remember, the city has a fueling system it also has to maintain and support also.
Member Nank?
Yeah, can we purchase that directly? 361 sounds great.
And we can get a lower rate because we buy in bulk.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, any further questions?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I do have
Member
one more
Blythe.
question. And again, this is more just for my understanding. I think on page 256, it talks about 25% markup on supplies that is designed to cover the cost of the warehouse operations. So we're charging the city a 25% markup for the warehouse?
For
So how does-
maintaining the warehouse, the carrying costs of the warehouse staffing, and basically the management of that
Right,
warehouse.
okay. And so what types of supplies are in the warehouse? Just real quick.
Oh, wide variety. I have seen signs for transportation. I have seen small nuts and bolts, those types of parts, as well as your cleaning supplies are there. So we're helping, facilities as well as other departments in the city that need that type of material.
Okay. And the reason I'm asking is...
As well as pipes are out there, too.
The reason I'm asking is just depending on the types of supplies, what the cost savings then is if we're purchasing it, storing it, and then turning around and charging the departments a 25% markup. Are there types of supplies that can be just purchased directly and delivered to the departments that we don't have to then turn around and charge them 25% to maintain a warehouse?
This is a very good question. And as we move through the fleet and just trying to manage the fleet, we are then also beginning to look at warehousing costs and what makes it basically more economical for the city to maintain in its warehouse and how and what levels. But we will be looking at that in the future.
A number
Councilor.
of companies, as we know, do just-in-time inventory.
Right, which is why I'm
And so we're looking at that concept, but also taking into account if we have a water main break in the middle of the night, there's some parts you just can't go out and
Certainly.
get or have delivered. So we'll be looking very closely about what type of parts, mostly more than supplies, do we want to keep in a warehouse? Can it be smaller? And then how can we do more just-in-time inventory management?
Exactly. And that was what I was getting at. Thank you.
And we also may carry things that are fairly obsolete, but we need the replacement parts for and can't buy them on open market.
Right. Thank you.
Do you have a fairly strict inventory control system in place? This is a lot of stuff that you're managing there. Is there a pretty robust inventory control system in place? I mean, are these kept in locked areas, or how is this dealt with?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of internal control around just the physical facility itself, but they also do, are we doing periodic inventory counts? Because I know we do spot counting constantly, so our accuracy is very, very high on our inventory.
We do daily inventory checks, what's called cycle counting, where each day we count one portion of the inventory, and through the year, an equivalent of something like 1.3 times the number of stock units are inventoried, because some of them are inventoried multiple times during a year. Our shrinkage rate is almost nothing. And we have been able to stop doing year-end physical inventories because the records are so good and the material is there, and an auditor can come down anytime and count anything in that warehouse. We'd welcome them.
Is there, I've seen this in manufacturing plants in the Midwest, I had a son-in-law involved in this kind of business, but where inventory is done by a contractor, I don't know if we do that out here or not, where you actually kind of have an external a contractor that provides a controlled inventory for you, making sure you got all the parts you need, all that's done. Is that done?
Chair, I have not seen that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe
It's
that's just an
interesting.
Ohio deal. I don't know. Thank goodness. Member Nang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question then in regards to inventory and the amount of time we spend cycle counting, cost benefit of that versus, are we over counting through our inventory to where we're utilizing some resources that
Those are all questions that we'll be looking at over the next couple of years as we go through this. But we feel very strongly, that, as Mr. Thompson could say, that we don't have shrinkage, that we understand everything. But really weighing that cost benefit
Right.
is part of what we'll be looking at.
Thanks.
Any more? Mr. Motley.
Yes, thank you. I want to commend looking at spot delivery and things. ODOT did this in the late 80s and early 90s, and literally emptied whole warehouses of stuff. Some things that they found were so old that they were so obsolete that they were able to sell them at a premium to collectors of trucks and cars and stuff. Along, of course, they found adding machine tape that the ribbon was completely dry. But I commend the activity in doing that. And as you know, ODOT has many of the same problems in terms of the specialized equipment and the specialized supplies that are needed on an instant's notice. I hope you'll perhaps consult with some of their older folks that were involved in that, see how they did that. And one thing I believe that they looked at in some of those harder to find specialized issues was using somewhat of an EOQ model, an economic order quantity. And it's a wonderful little device if you can make it work for something that's not a foodstuff or whatever. So, and then my last question, or my last comment, I hope the city has a policy that says that when you're called out to clean the ditch or to do whatever, that you shut the dang truck off while you're doing the work,
Yes.
Linda, you and I have talked about this for years, but I still see guys, when they get out and they replace the stop sign that's been bowled over, the truck sits there idling the whole time.
We do have a policy, and I will say we probably don't have 100% compliance with it yet, but it's something that we talk about all the time. Mr. Thompson meets every month with the vehicle users group and emphasizes how important that is. I've thought about leaving my business card on the windshield when I see one. So it's something we take very seriously. Anyway we would, but especially with fuel costs being so high.
Yeah, take a picture of it and forward it to city manager.
Member Clausen.
Thank you, Chair. A quick question on page 260 under expenditures. There's the intra-city budgeted transfer of $700,000, and maybe this helps me figure out what's going on. My first question was our internal revenue is up 1.4, but then we have a new budgeted transfer of $700,000. Is that part of the reason why that is? What is that budget transfer at?
That's really the recognition of the allocation of administrative costs over the fleet to its cost centers. So what you will also find on the revenue side, the same amount. So basically, it's recognizing the amount of overhead that is allocated to the fleet in the warehouse, and then you'll also see an offsetting expenditure cost for the same amount. If you look on...
I see. On 257?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I see. So it's just trying to more closely watch the money
Right.
due to you versus the expenditure
Exactly.
for what is put into that.
And it recognizes a full cost recovery of your direct costs as well as your administrative
Okay, that
costs.
makes sense. That helps me out with what that extra, of the $1.4 million revenue increase, it's just accounted for in the expenses too. Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
I have a couple questions. One was asked of me today when I was out speaking. Do we use hybrid cars, and do we have fuels, some cars that are fueled by natural gas?
Mayor, very good question. There are some hybrids in the fleet. That's part of even a strategy long-term to try and look at alternative types of vehicles that way. Don actually went to, I think it was last month, natural gas, how we could possibly bring that into our strategy as another fueling source, yes. We don't have it yet, but we are.
Do we have a plan to purchase any electric vehicles now that we have EV charging stations?
We have continuing discussions about that as we get opportunities, particularly, say, in the pool car situation. One thought I had was when a vehicle is basically used primarily just in the city for commuting purposes for meetings, it might be a very good use of an electric car as opposed to services that are further out from the downtown core area.
Okay.
Just as a practice, we typically don't buy equipment in its first year out because we want to make sure that if there are any problems with a piece of equipment that gets worked out before we buy it. But it's something that definitely we'll be looking to see what the opportunities are.
Good. Okay. And my second question has to do with the fact that we have many very high quality and reliable automobile mechanic companies and automobile repair companies right here in the city of Salem. Is there any opportunity for those businesses to bid on the work, the maintenance work on our vehicles? And do we, from time to time, use outside vendors like body shops or repair companies?
Mayor, yes, we do. Again, it's part of the long-term strategy is getting our costs in line to find out where we can be competitive in our hourly rate for our mechanics, and in viewing that also to then what do we shop out. We do, auto detailing is done outside the shop now, upfitting, some of the upfitting may be done outside. So that's why we're going through this 3-year plan of revamping the cost of the fleet area, get ourselves so we're right-sized, and then we can start to do some very quality comparatives to determine what to outsource and what to keep in shop.
Well, I would hope that along the way, as we're trying to get the fleet in right-sized, et cetera, but that you'd start gathering some of that data and occasionally having, as a test, having a car serviced outside and comparing what it would have cost inside, and so that we can, not wait 3 whole years to find out that then we'll start looking at the private sector for those services.
Mayor, I think we'll pretty much actively will be involved in that over the next 12 to 18 months, because now as we're starting to get better data. One of the things that Don and I actually have done in the last couple of weeks is we were contacted by Enterprise Rental Car that has a governmental service area where they look at sections of the fleet where it may be more advantageous for them to do the service as well as lease some of the vehicles that are not public safety. So yes, we are starting to investigate our options.
Thank you. Good.
Member Nanki?
Thank you. Yeah, and it would just be nice to see the full cost of alternative energy vehicles, because I know some of them have a very long payback, and our turnover on vehicles is very short, so we need to be mindful of that. And then just second thing, I know, I think it's Public Works. We share spare parts with some other jurisdictions. As far as if there's an emergency, just wanted to make sure we'd be looking at that through the warehousing on some of those things, because we do have Kaiser and Marion County and a lot of other people who may use similar pieces, and if it's just for emergency, we have a centralized location where any of those jurisdictions can go and then replace it for emergency uses.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Great, thank you. And we'll review the general debt fund and trust funds.
Good evening once again. Deborah Neville, City Budget Officer, and I'm here right now to present a couple of our fund budgets. The General Debt Fund is the first one I will go over. This fund is used to fulfill the city's debt obligations. We actually, in this fund, have two divisions, if you will. One is the General Debt Division, and this is the one that contains the expenses for funding our debt incurred for the streets and bridges bond, as well as the fire bond. The general obligation bond, as you can see in the green section of the table there, is running about $10 million for 12-13, and this is what it costs to repay the debt on those bond issuances. These bonds were approved by the voters, and we all have a tax rate for those that I will be showing you on the next slide. The pension bonds are funded within the city itself. There is no assessment or tax on that. Departments actually are assessed an equivalent share based upon what we owe in any given year. And next year's budget to repay is $4 million. So we receive money from property taxes to pay the general obligation bonds. On the table there, you can see the rate per thousand in assessed evaluation for 11-12 was 0.99 cents per $1,000. That's an actual figure. We're estimating that to go up to just over $1 in 12-13 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. And as I said before, the pension obligation bonds are contained in the department budgets and allocated proportionately. I'm available for any questions you have in this area.
On the retirement, the unfunded liability bonds.
Yes.
The $4 million, do you have a way of comparing that with your, what your PERS cost would have been if you had not done this bond sale?
Yes, we do have that information. I don't have it readily available. Do you have that?
We had some of it in the budget message, but we can bring that back next week. We do have the information.
Right. I just think it's interesting. I have thought that was a really interesting. This is one of the few cities that did that. A number of school districts did statewide, but this is one of the few cities that used its bonding capacity to lower its PERS costs. I thought that was interesting.
Yes, and in the budget message on page B6, we talk about the fact for next year that because we did this, we're saving about $385,000 for the 12-13 year alone. And we're a couple of million, I think, ahead at this point.
Over time,
but we can bring
yes.
that back to you.
Good. Well, that's okay. You give a description of it. I just thought it was a really a great strategy that most cities just didn't use, which I always found puzzling. So good for you. Any other questions?
Okay, I'll move into the trust funds. The trust funds are our funds that are received for particular purposes. It's actually a group of funds. You can find there's a tab section in your budget that lists every trust fund that we budget for. But primarily what we are aiming to do is have appropriation authority amongst all of these sufficient to cover any anticipated or unanticipated expenses. The table in front of you on the screen indicates that our budget total for next year is $2.3 million approximately. Most of it's in the capital outlay category, or the materials and services category. The capital outlay category of $500,000, we've actually included appropriation authority for that amount, the $500,000, just in the event something comes along and we do need to spend money. We will have appropriation authority in this area. Clearly, because it is a trust fund and the definition within each fund is very narrowly defined, each fund itself is individually set, the criteria is reviewed before we spend any money in any of these funds. Some of the bigger funds, we have the Telephone System Replacement Fund, and this is our own. It operates similar to an internal service fund. Departments are charged to use their telephones, and we have been accumulating money over the last couple of years in order to fund a replacement of our antiquated or older telephone system that has equipment that is probably not up to standard anymore. So this year, we've appropriated $750,000 in that particular replacement fund in order to do some further studies and design work and determine what is the best system to implement, and then next year would be a phase 2 of that particular program. We aren't certain exactly how much that will cost yet, but we have dedicated some funds to that. Of the 750,000 noted, there is one staff person and some supplies that are paid for from there.
In regard to the work that we're doing, having an outside firm come in and look at, can we replace it over time? Because I would rather not make a $2 million expense for a new telephone system replacement right now. Would it be possible to just add to what we have right now so we wouldn't have to do a full replacement? So there's some of these costs will be for the actual work and some of it's for the analysis.
Yeah, because that was a scary number.
Yes, yes.
Did you want to?
Yeah, because it was $750,000 to study a phone system is kind of what my ears heard, and they went,
No, it's for also work that will be done over this next year. But
Okay.
we to start with, our first step is what do we really need to do and by when?
cell phones for everyone. Get rid of the hard lines.
Till you have an emergency.
Also within this group of funds, we have 3 or 6 funds that address library issues. Again, they're for very specific purposes within the library. There are 6 associated with police work and 2 associated with fire. Revenues come from donations, gifts, or proportionate revenue. And what I mean by proportionate revenue is some of our park reserves are established by paying into this fund a proportion of the, say, when we rent out Pringle Hall, a small share of that rental rate goes into the reserve fund so we can maintain that facility. Riverfront Park also operates that way as well. Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Are there any questions? All right, good.
I have a comment. I'm
Mayor.
sorry, it's all right. I should make you more aware of me over here. It's all right. I just wanted to note that I saw that we have trust funds that in a couple of instances may provide the opportunity for the neighborhood association that wanted to collect donations for their newsletter, because I see we have one that says to receive funds donated for project materials and newsletters for the Southeast Salem Neighborhood Association, Cessna, response effort, and then another one to receive, hold, and disperse private donations for the benefit of neighborhoods, youth, and historic preservation. So I'm wondering if funds like that could be the pass-through for the donations that some of the neighborhood associations are talking about receiving, so that they can then mail out their newsletters or materials.
Yes, they can be.
They could do that?
Yes.
Okay, well, we should get the word to those. I don't remember, was it Nesca? And maybe there were some others that
Ms.
questioned
Woods is
as well.
just waiting to give you some information about
Oh,
this. Okay.
Thank you.
Vicki Harden, Woods Community Development Director. Thank you. This was actually kind of a question that came up last week and we didn't really get an opportunity to address. We are trying to look at ways where neighborhood associations can receive funds and we can grant money to them that they can use for that purpose. We have a long-standing issue with neighborhood associations trying to establish 501(c)(3)s organizations, and they're not able to really do that. But if we have these city funds and we put some parameters around grants that we give to them, that's an opportunity for them to be able to fund some of those kinds of things, do some fundraising, the city to provide grants. And so we think that is a real opportunity in the future, and that's exactly why you see those funds beginning to get established here.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Thank you. Member Nanki.
And there have been city councilors in the past that have donated excess funds at the end of their campaigns into that for neighborhood association use as well, just in case anyone
Including
wants to know.
yourself, I'll bet. That's great. Deborah?
No, I'm just available for questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Motley.
Well, you're looking good too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Amen.
You're done?
I'm done.
That was quick. Member George?
Yeah, what is neighborhood enhancement? I noticed that was that one down there, that one line item on page 314. It shows a balance of, well, to be dispersed, it says 11,990, and, you know, and receipts 6,980, but then balance at the end of the 2013 says 290. I don't know what that is.
Well, to answer your first question, what we're trying to do here is provide appropriation authority for any event that may come up within the narrowly defined area. So it may be we don't spend all of that, we may not even get it all in, but I'm making the best estimate possible based upon what we know about this. And neighborhood is...
Neighborhood enhancement.
Enforcement, or enhancement is part of that funding group that Ms. Woods addressed just a moment ago.
Okay.
I'm looking for the definition of that one, just for your reference. That may be found on page 311. We provide approximately 2 pages of definitions for each of these funds, so that you can, just by the short description, it may not be easy to tell what it's about. This is a little more detailed.
Yeah, because if that's there, because I think that's one of the things that we have spoken to before about a concern about not being able to get an annual letter out the letter for the annual meeting out anymore, which is a major way that we get new members in the neighborhood association. So, but if there's a fund established where you could maybe solicit donations to it, that would be, if that's what that is, then I'd all for that.
That's what it would be for, to
Okay.
receive the donation to use.
Okay. Any further questions? All right, we'll move on then to goal setting and policy discussions. Any goal setting or policy suggestions? Well, we'll get that's the goal. Trust me, I'm watching my watch. The only one I would remind you is next week is the week we'll do the deed on the budget.
We do have public testimony.
I know.
Okay.
That's next.
It's like taking the cat to the vet.
So we will, right now, we have one thing on the wish list. If you have any other motions you want to make, the way I intend to proceed, unless you tell me you would rather not do it this way, would be to seek a motion on the city manager's budget. There's a few enough number of these wish list item that we may want to then just proceed by amendment. I think it'd be simplest to operate that way. And then I hope you will think about any recommendations you would have to pass along to the city council, whether it be around budget policy you've heard, revenue ideas you may have, anything like that that we can then deal with perhaps in some separate motions. So you want to start thinking, and I would just suggest to you a good way to deal with that would be to circulate, aside from the one that is noted of $70,000 for West Salem, any other ideas you have, you may want to circulate them in advance with a brief rationale. It'll make it go easier next week if everybody's pretty much aware of what you're thinking and what your intended motion is. And if you're intending to make a motion, I would really recommend to you talk to one of the other members to make sure you have a second, because it just doesn't make it without a second. So it's always good to make sure you got a backup person. You're sort of parliamentary wingman in all this stuff. So, okay? Anything else?
Question?
I'm sorry, Mr. Motley?
Is it the chair's intention then that next meeting will in fact be our last meeting? We won't utilize May 1st or 9th?
No, we've done a very good job of working our way through this, and we'll be done in 4 meetings. Very pleased. Okay, we now have public testimony for other budget issues. Anybody want to? There you are.
Rebecca Roth. I'm outside of city limits, and I'm kind of thinking that everything you guys do here really affects me. That's why I'm here. I haven't really known why I'm here up until now. I am really new at this, so I really want your input. But I went and looked at urban renewal this last week, and the two words urban and renewal to me say you're dealing with things having to do with the city and you're renewing. And to me, the bridge doesn't fit in that because the island is in natural condition. You're not renewing anything. You're developing something. And the bridge out there is a very expensive thing, but then when it gets built, it's going to be access to all kinds of people. It's going to have to be policed. It's going to have all kinds of problems, just like the city has. And so it seems to me that instead of eliminating blight, it will create blight. So, oh, and in the transportation thing, I was thinking, instead of electric cars, maybe bicycles.
Excellent.
Since there's bicycle lanes.
Thank you. Any questions?
No. For like you were talking about the going from the offices to offices in downtown Salem, and like those tricycles that they have those little the little companies that provide transportation. The city could do something like that too, instead of electric cars, which are very expensive.
Thank you. Just a moment. Member Thomas had a question.
Which bridge are you talking about?
The bridge to nowhere.
We refer to it as the Minto Island Bridge officially. So, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have a comment? All right. Is there any other business? Then without objection, we're adjourned.